Great. Well, welcome everybody, both to those of you who are here in person, which is always great. It's particularly exciting these days to have the opportunity to do these events in person, but also to those of you who are joining us remotely. It's great to have this opportunity, and it's a special privilege for me to welcome the Ambassador of Colombia, Ambassador Pinzón. This is a very special occasion. It's the 200th anniversary of U.S.-Colombian relations, and it's an important moment to reflect on a long and very special history between the United States and Colombia, and the United States' historic involvement, sometimes for better and sometimes not so much for the better, in the evolution of this hemisphere. But the period in which our founding period, back to the time of President Monroe and the establishment of diplomatic relations, was a critical moment in the emergence of democracy in this hemisphere, and Colombia has played an important role not just at that time in helping to kindle the light of democracy in Latin America, but also through the years. So it is a great opportunity for us to be able to celebrate this very special anniversary and to look back both on what's been accomplished in U.S.-Colombian relations over the past 200 years, but also what we're doing together today. And no better person to talk about this than the ambassador, who has a long and distinguished career, including a very extensive career in his involvement with the United States. It's his second time as ambassador from Colombia to the United States. He served from 2015 to 2017, which, as I'm sure most of you know, was an extraordinarily important moment in both Colombia and in U.S.-Colombian relations, with the signing of the peace agreement and the implementation of basically the second era of Plan Colombia and the deepening of relations between the United States that helped support that historic peace agreement. Before his first tour, he also served as a Minister of Defense in Colombia for nearly 4 years, and played a particularly important role not only in dealing with the challenges within Colombia, but also as a regional leader in security cooperation, which played such an important role. And through the course of his career, he's held many important positions, including Chief of Staff to the President, Deputy Minister of Defense, Senior Advisor to the Executive Director of the Board at World Bank, Vice President of the Colombian Banking Association, Assistant Vice President of Investment Banking at Citigroup, and many other positions. So a very distinguished career in both the public and the private sector. And so really terrific to have him. But the most important of all, as you can probably guess, is that he also studied at SAIS, right? And while he didn't do his degree here, he took a number of courses here, including Strategy and Policy with Tom Keeney and War in the Modern World with our own Dean, Elliot Cohen. So it's especially great to have you as a member of the SAIS community here. So really grateful to you for taking the time. It's a personal privilege for me, as you mentioned. During my own career, I've had an extensive opportunity to work with leaders of both parties and ambassadors over an extended period of time in building U.S.-Colombian relations, and had an extraordinary relationship with many of your predecessors who have been great friends to me personally and to the U.S.-Colombian relations. So you are just another one in the line of a great tradition of wonderful ambassadors who have helped build this very special relationship. So thank you for being with us today. Do you want to just say a few opening words, and then I can begin with some questions?
Well, first of all, thank you. Very generous from you to have me at SAIS. As you all said, it's a place I have in my heart. I enjoy very much the time I came here to be taught and lectured by many of the wonderful professors you have. Even Professor Mencken here today. Great to see you again, Tom, and so happy to see you and, well, many others that at some point were very important for to structure a perspective to the world, and especially on the strategic thinking about national security and how important that was for our role in Colombia later. But I also want to say it's a privilege to be here with you, specifically with you, Jim, because you were one of those who crafted the U.S. policy for Colombia, both in the National Security Council during President Clinton's time, and later on as Deputy Secretary of State during the President Obama's administration. And we're thankful for that because you were substantial to Colombia. You have visited Colombia and you have contributed to make Colombia policy broad about, of course, security and defense, but on the other side about social and rural development, but also an institutional development as well. So thank you for that, and it's great to be here. So I think this will be like exam for me, you know, to speak and answer questions in front of you.
Well, it's just a pleasure and an opportunity to talk. We had a chance to talk both between us and with several of the students here just before coming down, and there's so much to talk about and so many different topics that we could and should cover. And I think it would be useful just to start out by reflecting on what has, in your view, sort of has been the key to sustaining the bond between the United States and Colombia. I mean, I mentioned the fact that this was the first country in Latin America that the United States recognized. There is this long historic association. But what do you think has sustained this over the years, and what do you attribute the fact that it has been such a deep and close connection?
Shared values. Is democracy from day one, is freedom, is human rights, and is free markets. And those four things along our history, we kind of refurbish, we adapt to technology, we adapt to whomever is in charge in both our countries, but somehow we continue to believe and promote those same values. Now then you can think about facts, and there are facts that are important that have somehow developed and expressed those values. But as you said, since the early beginning, the US was the first country to recognize Colombia. The first ever diplomat from Latin America that came to the United States was from Colombia. And actually the first diplomat that the US sent to Latin America actually was to Colombia. So the bond started strong since the beginning. By mid-19th century, we asked the US to help us to protect our territories because we're so huge that, frankly speaking, we couldn't really take care. That was a mistake. And you know what? Because we told you, well, now that you're helping us to protect those beautiful lands in Panama, why don't you help us with the railroad? And later on, might you think on a canal, and suddenly you took the canal, right? You took Panama. That was the low point, and frankly speaking, it started with a lot of passion, with a lot of love, and then was for us like what a betrayal, moment. So we kind of get some frustration for 30 years. And it really lasted from 1903 to 1930s. But on fairness for the United States, the US came back with a resolution, with an agreement. We had the Urrutia-Thompson agreement that recognized somehow the misbehave and actually promoted a compensation. And that was, I think, important because it proved that this country is a country of values and that we had many reasons to continue to gather together. By the way, then historically we thought that we would never sustain Panama anyway, but that's a different conversation for Colombians. But since then, we've been in the same side during World War II. We fought the German U-boats in the Caribbean. Then we fought together in Korea, and we were the only Latin American country that sent 3,100 Colombian soldiers, 3 naval vessels to Korea. Out of those, 200 Colombians were killed in action. Around 60 are still missing in action, and 600 were wounded. And that created a bond between the US, South Korea, I have to tell you, we have a special crush and relationship with that country, and of course, Colombia. But then about diplomatic times and moments, we were together with the UN Charter. We went together for the creation of the Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank and IMF. We were together for the creation of the OAS. It did happen in Bogotá in 1948. During the Cold War, we completely sided with the United States with a special characteristic out of other countries that were partners to the US. We kept democracy. Most of countries of Latin America basically went into dictatorships, military dictatorships, or caudillos. And if you look East Asia or Africa, that was the kind of government that was usual in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s, not Colombia. So that was another reason to establish the bond. In 1961, President Kennedy launched the Alliance for Progress, which still today is one of the most thoughtful and strategic activities the US have ever done in the Western Hemisphere for Latin America. Still, he's regarded as the leader beyond the United States to the region. It did happen in Bogotá, you know? So it's kind of all these events, by some reason, always connect us. Since President Reagan, every president of the United States have visited Colombia, with the exception of the last one that sent his daughter, but all other were there. And now about President Biden. There's today a uniqueness in that relationship. Biden visited Colombia 6 times before being president of the United States. When President Clinton, with President Pastrana, put together Plan Colombia, Senator Biden was the ranking member and the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Later on, he was vice president, and he promoted the idea of a free trade agreement that we're celebrating this year, next month, 10 years in enactment. After that, his last trip as vice president was to Cartagena to launch the US-Colombia Business Council. Later on, we get accession to the OECD, and we became global NATO partners. And now as president, in the first meeting we really had among our leaders 2 weeks ago, he granted Colombia something that I believe was well-deserved for a long time. Now I can say it openly, but finally was executed, declaring Colombia a major non-NATO ally, which is the highest status we can have in a relationship. We're proud for that, and we feel we really have achieved an important point. About recent events, we're thankful to the US for providing vaccines to Colombia. It was crucial to recover our economy and to somehow confront the crisis. As of today, 8 million vaccines have been donated. It's very important to us. Second, on climate change, we were together at Glasgow, and Colombia has become probably the country that in the Latin American region is advancing more on non-conventional renewables, on solar and wind, and that's really executing somehow a shared vision on what needs to be done. And about protecting democracy, I think both of us are worried on the issues that are going on in Latin America. From one perspective is the real concern about the dictatorships of Maduro and Ortega that are really harming their own people, that are really violating human rights, that are really destroying democracy as we know it, their own countries, but also are siding with rogue regimes or extra-regional powers that are trying to come to the Western Hemisphere, seeking to annoy the region, but somehow to deteriorate the democratic values and tissue that we have. And we are together onto that one. But then when major things have happened in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Colombia is, as of now, the only one of the 5 major Latin American countries that openly, through President Duque, has expressed a absolute frustration and is strongly against what Putin and Russia has done to Ukraine. And we oppose that, and we have done that openly as keep this idea of sharing values. Plan Colombia was crucial. I will leave it as another story if you want to ask about it, because it is so important, because Colombia was at its knees by the end of 20th century, and because we got Plan Colombia, and of course the will of our leaders, the commitment and sacrifice of our soldiers and policemen and of our national population as a whole, we were able to overcome that, to the point that we had the conditions to negotiate a peace agreement that was expected to be a real solution, and unfortunately has not come to be that, but that's part of the story. Probably we will need to get in depth.
Great. Well, thank you. And as I think you could hear from that, I think that was a real tour de force. But the depth and range of the relationship is really extraordinary. And the thing that always struck me is just how much shared history we had and how many shared interests that we had. Let me just stay with Ukraine just for a second. You know, as you mentioned, this was an important part of the discussion between President Duque and President Biden. I'd be interested in your perspective how this is seen in Latin America. I mean, is there a broad appreciation of the importance of defending sovereignty and the like here? Or how do you see this not just in Colombia, but more broadly in the region as to how impactful this is in a way? We certainly see it, you know, in Europe and elsewhere, but how is this seen in Latin America?
Well, as I said, in Latin America are different approaches to the what it has been perceived in the invasion in Ukraine. And I should not speak for other governments. You know, I think they will have their reasons or their views on why they are doing that. From our perspective in Colombia, of course, we're very concerned. First, because we have been one of those countries that, starting with the UN Charter, we strongly believe in diplomacy and peaceful solutions of conflicts, and more important than all, that there needs to be some level of civilized relationship among nations. So nobody really moves into aggression to others. And there are rules that everybody's supposed to respect. If, as in any other game, in the game of diplomacy, you have rules and you respect the rules, somehow you understand the game and you can play it. But if some do not respect the rules and take advantage by not using the rules, then the situation gets unbalanced. And of course, that even brings to the position of other countries or your own country having to take its own measures. And of course, what will that bring? Conflicts, more conflicts, wars, and more violence. So we're worried about that, and this is why we felt that we needed to be strong to mention this. Now, since unfortunately for Latin America, we see some intentions of extra-regional powers trying to take a role in the region, we need to be more vocal. We've seen these recent intentions of Russia, not only in the United States before, in France, in Germany, but certainly we saw it in Colombia. This weekend was released by national media some evidence of some operatives in Colombia trying to promote some of the riots that were seen last year. And of course, we already detected before some clear connections between the disinformation campaign in social media to the world and the things that have been evolving into Colombia. So we have to be realistic and said, we don't understand the reason, or maybe we know it very clear. They want to poke the eye of the United States, and of course we are getting for free also those adversaries to the United States in a way. Then we see other powers like Iran playing a role, and it's not a secret for anyone. China is raising its stake into the world. I see China and the others in a very different perspective, because I think they look more like the United States in the 1920s, in a sense of it's a country that is trying to create its own power through economic influence, and that is going on. The thing that concerns other countries in the regions, and definitely as of today, Colombia, is that it's wonderful to have more opportunities, more business, more investment, and better relationship with any country in the world, and that of course includes China as a very important one. What we would not like to have in the future is the intention of influencing our democracy, because we care for our democracy and we have fought for it. So why we will look for other models other than the one that is really based and set up in our own values?
Is it your sense that this fear of biting the economic hand that many countries are beginning to look to from both Russia and China constraining the response of other countries in the region to this issue in Ukraine?
Maybe so. Now, I would insist in seeing Russia very differently from China. I think China cannot be, although you experts will bring, and of course for us as students on these subjects would understand the connections and relations. I don't want to build onto that. What I see is differences of approaches definitely in the region. What I've seen from Russia is more selling weapons, buying commodities, and establishing bases for intelligence gathering, both with electronic warfare capabilities or simply with cyber capabilities that are being used and in place in the region. What I see from China of today in Latin America is increasing presence in business on every layer, on mining and minerals, on infrastructure, and in technology. And that needs to be, of course, analyzed in terms of the grade of having that kind of development and investment opportunity, but also the concerns that need to be professionally analyzed and addressed, not to allow influence into our democracy or our democracies.
You mentioned your new status as a major non-NATO ally, which is obviously a great achievement, and congratulations for what that represents in terms of the contribution that Colombia makes. So in thinking about Ukraine, I mean, one of the things that Colombia has great experience in, especially recently, is dealing with migration and refugees. I understand that there's been some discussion to try how to draw on the experience and the expertise that you have to help the neighboring countries of Ukraine. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how Colombia might help us think about managing this horrific refugee and humanitarian crisis that Ukraine has triggered, especially in the NATO countries.
So in the recent visit of President Duque, one of the most important meetings we had was with my colleague and friend, the ambassador of Ukraine. And not only we expressed solidarity, but we also told her that the experience we learned with hosting our Venezuelan brothers and sisters, we learn on processes, and we learn on how to somehow adapt the healthcare system, the educational system, and other humanitarian required capabilities. So we offer that experience. President Duque has spoken with the president of Poland, maybe so the president of Romania, and I might be missing one of the other border countries, to offer that experience on humanitarian aid and process, and tell them if that is of service and use, we're here and ready to at least tell the story and be helpful. And also there has been some discussion inside our government to think if it's necessary to offer some level of humanitarian aid, either through medical assistance, for instance, the trauma knowledge of our military doctors is extremely high just because we suffer from war. So we have a lot of experience onto that, and there was some kind of conversation if at some point we might be supporting such kind of support. But that's what we can do at this point. Anyway, as you know, this is an election year in Colombia, and we need to focus and be very clear on what matters right now is making sure that our democracy is not influenced and works well.
Understood. So this does lead to reflecting a little bit on the situation in Venezuela. I mean, obviously, no country has been impacted more by the crises, the multiple crises in Venezuela than Colombia. So maybe you could talk both a little bit about sort of the current state of you're trying to manage that relationship and what, if any, prospects you see for progress on the political front in Venezuela.
Difficult. I don't see much chances as things are today, because I still see a regime that is really harming its own people, denying spaces to its opposition, only opening spaces for convenience and to try to hold their own power, rather than really allowing free and open opinion and competition. The media is basically controlled, and whomever gets out of the line, they have been going after them. Still millions of Venezuelans are outside, still people is trying to come out. And something that is worrying me a lot is that I see some level of informal dollarization of the Venezuelan economy, but when you dollarize an economy, you have to ask yourself, why can you do it? Well, you can do it if you have dollars. How do you get the dollars? That's the big question I invite experts to make. How do you get the dollars? Because if they are not getting huge dollars from exports of oil or something else. So where is this central bank or Federal Reserve they're getting? I have to say that it's very much connected to the trade of cocaine coming from Colombia and the trade of illegal gold mining and other minerals, both from the Venezuelan territories and also from Colombia's criminals. So that is worrisome, because somehow it's an economy that is living out of sources of income that are criminal by definition, and that is very problematic. Imagine how you can really evolve into something that is credible and non-unethical, and that's what is problematic. So that's what we perceive.
Given your analysis of how entrenched Maduro is, I mean, what's the right strategy? I mean, what would Colombia counsel others to do? Deepen the pressure, tighten the noose, or I mean, how to deal with a situation like this when the internal forces for change, which are not trivial but are unable to mobilize themselves, aren't getting any traction?
No easy answer, and I don't think there's a booklet or manual that will give that answer. Everybody will have a perspective, and everybody will have something to add. What is clear is the objective, and the end should be reestablishing democracy in Venezuela sooner than later. Ways to get there, you can have the whole toolkit, part of the toolkit, or a few big shots, out of that. But what I believe is important is to keep seeking for the objective of really allowing power sharing, in a way, change of power when the Venezuelan people freely can decide it. Those are the things that are natural and that are important. But what I strongly believe is what we cannot forget is who they are and what their intentions are. Because sometimes when you get to the idea that, well, let's negotiate, which is part of diplomacy, I think that's important too. But what is the objective and who you are dealing with? Because you can never forget the intentions and what they are trying to make use of a negotiation for their own purposes. And that's where we need to be very strong and very clear on the line of what can be achieved and what can be done.
So it's a nice segue into the Colombian peace process, because, as you say, I mean, one of the issues in a negotiation is always trying to understand what the real motive and objectives are. And throughout the debate over the peace process in Colombia, there were debating intentions about whether any of the parties, other than the Colombian government perhaps, really were serious about peace on both sides, both on the respect to the FARC and the terrorist groups, but also with the paramilitaries. But the agreement happened. President Santos got the Nobel Prize, and it was, it seemed a moment in which, as President Clinton would used to say, a strategic decision for peace had been made by the parties. Do you think that's still true today, that there is and I want to get into some of the specifics of implementation, but on this deep level, that there is putting aside differences on the details, whether all of the key parties are still committed to this historic peace agreement?
Very well. Few comments. We are experts on peace deals in Colombia. This is one of the 5 we have achieved. So, I mean, if you said this is the peace, I have to say it's not, for 2 reasons. First, because we have 5 prior, but second, because we haven't still yet negotiated with some of the challenges that still we have. So that's a big question. So one thing is selling and overselling, and the other thing is the reality of what peace is all about in Colombia. The first thing. The second one is, look, I probably feel a lot of comfort to say that I was part of the people that made more decisions to make peace in Colombia with the FARC, probably more than many other Colombians that now feel they own the peace agreement, but not the peace. And with that, what I will tell you is that I haven't met yet any Colombian that doesn't want peace. And there's a lot of people that really has made decisions, as I said, and fought for peace. The problem came when the conditions for peace negotiations came, and I think there was probably a major consensus, both in Colombia and in the US, expert, non-experts, government people, people outside the government. That was the right time. Because we were really now in a position of strength. Somehow the Plan Colombia and the efforts to strengthen the institutions as a whole worked in a way that we really weakened the FARC. They were now, at that time, just a hollow of what they were. And we were really able to go after the whole leadership of the FARC. That was the kind of decisions we made, and I personally made. You know, so we know exactly what we're talking about and what we created as space. What was very sad was the way the negotiations were performed. I see two things, looking for history not to stay there, but to move to the future. We cannot stay in 2016. 2016, as good for some, as bad for some it was, is history now. We need to bring peace to Colombia and bring opportunity. What I learned from those negotiations, first, the Colombian government made a huge mistake by showing the opponent how much it was ready to concede for getting a peace agreement. So the strength we had in the military, we lost it for excess of showing we're ready to, you know, whatever it takes. The Nobel Prize, whatever it takes. You see, that was problematic. And the bad guys, or the opponents, to be fair, saw it. The second thing was a big mistake, was that they saw the political divide on Colombian people. And this is a way to criticize all the players, because the political divide was so high that what the opponents of the Colombian institutions and establishments saw was the opportunity to go in the middle and break that division. So of course, as a negotiation for history, I think experts like the ones we have in this wonderful school will need to think about the experience and why that was good or not. Now, about the agreement itself, there are a few things that are concerning. The first one, this agreement was consulted to Colombian people. And you know the result. So by definition, if we believe in democracy, here's an original sin. Colombian people opposed to the agreement. And later on it was pushed, a little bit with power politics in the Congress, a little bit in the judiciary. At the end, it's a law, it's an obligation, but the political sentiment for many is that was against the will of the people. Now, what are the contents that are concerning and what are the positives? Let me start with the positives. An important level of demobilization was good news. And an important level of demobilization was good news. The problems. One, sense of impunity. I'm going to give you a story of these past elections 2 weeks ago. There's a member of Congress that was seeking his reelection. And he, of course, competed as anyone else. But what's his story? His story was that he was hostage of the FARC, kidnapped for 5 years. His father was kidnapped, and in order for his father to die with dignity, because he had a disease, he went and offered himself. So they kept him as hostage, his father went out and died. That guy achieved like 40,000 votes. He was only 2,000 votes short to get his seat. He lost his seat. Fair, his elections. What is very dramatic is that his captors, the guys who kidnapped him, who gave the orders, are members of Congress with 0 votes. How do you explain that? So I'm not saying let's go back to 2016. Let's correct this so we can move to the future. Victims cannot be below those who perform the crimes. And that dialogue forms part of Colombian life today. But this is even worse. That has empowered some who have made terrible crimes to feel that everybody's equal in Colombia, that those who committed war crimes are just as good people as the people that we have in this room today. Can't be. So that's one thing I see. And the second one is, unfortunately, the cocaine business. There's a big debate here in the United States about the war on drugs, and I like to separate that debate from the Colombian debate. Let me explain why. Because the reason why we fight drugs is not for fighting drugs. We fight the groups that benefit out of the business of drugs that create terrorism and violence in Colombia. So it's not the drug the problem. The problem is the criminal. That's one thing I like to remind ourselves. The second one, we were really at the lowest point of production of cocaine a year and a half before the agreements. But the Colombian government made the concession ahead of time and said, no, we will not spray more. And we will now pay to the peasants to get other products instead of cocaine. Consequence is that we have to eat 5 times more cocaine than before. So there's a risk of deterioration of Colombian stability. And what those who made that decision now are using as excuses because the war on drugs failed, but they are not talking about the decisions they made to contain the war on drugs or the war on the crimes so it can be contained. Why this is problematic today? Because it's not philosophical. Because that money kills people. And allow me to use this group of people to mention, if you know anybody who takes cocaine, please tell them not to. I'm very much for free choice and freedoms. I strongly believe into that. But I want people to remind the following. Every time you take that dust, what you're doing is, first of all, destroying the Amazon, basically taking a lot of chemicals into rivers. Not to forget, you're putting money into terrorists that it doesn't matter the side they are, they will go and kill social leaders and they will control territories against the will of the people. And they will even make them almost slaves to do gold mining or to basically cultivate cocaine. That's something that I believe is important because now that creates some level of instability and the current political times in Colombia are somehow affected by this noise. I think you didn't expect this answer, but I've been thinking about this for years, as you can imagine. And as being one of the people that was really part of those who pushed to make the peace and suddenly got this shock of seeing where the trends were moving, my conclusion was that we were doing the right thing, but then we negotiated poorly. And we lost a big opportunity. Now, should we go back to the past? No way. What we should do is correct what needs to be corrected and look to the future learning out of that experience. That's what I believe.
It's a very thoughtful and candid exposition, and one I think that there'd be a lot of, we could probe in a great deal more detail. Let me just do one piece of this, because I just can't totally let it go, which is that, there's been a lot of outside scholars who've looked at the implementation of the agreement, probably the Kroc Center at Notre Dame most famously, and the assessment there has been that a lot of these problems that you've identified, including the return of the drug trade, is because of the failure of the Colombian government to establish a presence in the countryside, to implement. They've done a chart on the degree of implementation of the provisions of the agreement and the implementation rate by their assessment, and they're more in the details than I am, so I'm not vouching for it, I'm just reporting it, is that the rate of implementation has declined radically. And so this vacuum was created, and the expectation was that what would allow this not to return is because both on the economic development front and the security side, that the government would come into the countryside, would create a situation where there was a sense of order and security. So, and some of you will have read the most recent New York Times as well article on this. So what's your response to that? I mean, understanding your view that the agreement is flawed, but it is the agreement, sort of, what's your
Well, three things I have about that. The first one is, remember I was the Minister of Defense who got the lowest ever production of cocaine in history, but the one who told the president of the time, Mr. President, please do not give up cocaine until we got the final agreement. because the country will be floating in cocaine. So any excuse I see out of that, I knew the answer for before. So even to my friends at the Croc, what I will tell them is they are starting to measure 2016 onwards, but the decisions were made a little bit before, even 15. So the fact is that it was a consequences of a bad decision, and that explains a lot of the cocaine business. Now, focusing on the agreements is what we have. Few things. The first one, I was not part of this government until 8 months ago. So I was a free, open citizen to speak for a while. And one of the things that I keep telling, and I give in favor of President Duque, is that when he came in, he had a set of agreements with no penny to fund it. So that was really problematic. So, I mean, you can say, yes, this is all the things you have to do. Where is the money to do it? Where is the plan to execute it? So that was the first thing this administration had to confront. Plan something to execute some of that money and really produce a result. That's point number one. Point number two, if you look today, anyway, those agreements, according to what was signed, were expected to be implemented in 15 years, with only even before half of that. And already the country has moved something like to 30 to 35% according to Crocs. So it's kind of, we're already in a third of that. Was that supposed to be better? Maybe so, but nobody knew about something that is called migration from Venezuela. So 2 million Venezuelans in addition to that problem to be addressed. So where was the money for that too? And second, COVID, the worst ever economic crisis in the history of the world, certainly in the history of Colombia. So when those two things hit, probably the acceleration of how to do the other plan probably was a little bit compromised as well. Anyhow, today, numbers from Colombian government imply that when they started the government, there were only like less than 100 projects being developed. When I said projects, it implies schools, roads, or small economic social programs. Today, there's an estimate of 1,200 projects going on in the country about this. So, if the question is, taking development to the marginal areas of Colombia will contribute to bring peace and stability to Colombia? The answer is yes, and you knew it from 1997 when you started to think about Plan Colombia. So we knew it from a long time. The question is, 20-some more years, why we haven't been there? Well, it's a big flaw, but it implies that it's a big country with a lot of complications and a lot of difficulties still in security, and the big answer is, are we already starting to address that? The answer is yes. Should we go faster? Hopefully. With those who are in agreement with the peace agreement or not. Anyway, we will have to take development to the marginal areas of Colombia. And that's a real challenge that this administration has had with these two realities, migration from Venezuela and the fact of COVID, that let's hope next administration doesn't have. However, one challenge I do see for whomever is going to be the next president of Colombia, starting August the 7th, is that fiscal challenges are more difficult today than there were 10 years ago. COVID hit hard the United States, the European countries, the whole world, and to even put money onto that, next administration will have to make choices. Do we accelerate those projects, or do we accelerate education in the cities? Well, you have to make both, but those are the kind of choices that governments will confront, and especially in Colombia.
So it's a good transition to my next question. Let me just alert the audience. I've got two more brief topics, and then I'm going to go to you for questions, both in the room and beyond. So get ready. I think we have mics, and I know we all want to have plenty of time for you to ask questions. So you talked about the economic situation, so I got to raise the other great moment in U.S.-Colombian relations for the last 25 years, which is the free trade agreement, which was for a long time controversial in the United States, but as you noted, was something we were able to achieve during the Obama administration. And I'd just be interested in your thoughts both on the implementation of the agreement, but also more broadly how you see the future of this. I mean, there's been a backlash against free trade generally and about these kinds of agreements. And so how do you see this going forward?
Well, I still strongly believe that we need to rely on trade as a good decision. There's no country in the world that has become a strong economy, developed economy that favors its own people without having a strong opportunity with trade. And when I look to the United States, that's what I perceive. But when I think about Norway or Sweden or those countries, they have effectively been able to do that. And when I look today to China, China is all about trade at the end. So progress is related to trade. So I strongly believe that what we need is rules and really resettle the way we do trade, so some countries do not take advantage of others. That's, to me, the first thing. Second, education becomes more important by the day, not only because it helps to pacify minds and allows more and better civilized behavior and better policies and more thoughtful, but in addition to that, because we need skilled people to compete in the new realities of economics. And that implies the digital realm that is transforming the world faster than we know, and that in 2 decades from today probably will just dominate everything we do. So if we want societies that are competitive, we will really need to put our people into those kind of training and skills. For Colombia, the free trade agreement with the United States has been sweet and sour. Let me start with sour. We were somehow accepted a labor chapter that nobody else accepted before to get the agreement.
Which you would not have had the agreement on the U.S. side without.
I know, but it still is harmful because we are having rules on labor that not even the United States have to comply. You can have basically cooperatives, organizations, you can have workers that work for hours here easily. In our agreement, you don't want us to do that. And the question is, why you can do it and why we cannot? Because we need you to be responsible with your labor. Yeah, but why you can do things and why we cannot? And this is a question that will come back and forth, along history. At that time, I understand the reason was the intention of the U.S. and those who brought those ideas were trying to protect labor rights and especially the life of labor activists. So beyond that, that was that. But that's a chapter that I believe needs to evolve in the future to something more that allows Colombian competitiveness. Otherwise, we are being harmed in our competitiveness. Second, the United States export now more to Colombia and Colombia exports to the US. And that's something you like here, but we would prefer to have it the other way, Good news, positive. More non-commodity exports have increased from Colombia to the US, which implies that our industry and our agricultural businesses somehow have been finding new markets here in the US, and that's very good news. And third, the best news of all, is that investment from the United States to Colombia has raised in a very high level, which all the externalities and implications that has. So it's good news at the end, and it's something I believe we need to continue to promote and move forward.
So my last question, you touched a number of times on the issue of climate change and Colombia's role on climate change. And I'd just be interested in your own thoughts. You were at Glasgow, the president was there, you've been active on this stuff. Yet as we look, not just in Latin America, but particularly in Latin America, about the loss of tropical rainforests, and it doesn't look to the outside like we're on top of this. I mean, there's both the global problem of what the overall level of emissions are, but these are these very localized problems of individual countries and policies that are leading to loss of biodiversity, significant deterioration of the carbon sequestration that comes from the forest and the like. So what more needs to be done? I mean, what's Colombia's perspective about what the international community has to do to draw a line under this and reverse what seem to be deteriorating trends in a number of respects?
Well, I will start with a point I made already, but just for everybody to keep it in mind. Please do not take drugs, especially cocaine, because it's very harmful for the tropical forest. And don't forget that gold, you better ask where the gold is coming from, because it is coming from an illegal source, usually is against the planet. Really harmful. Now, out of that, Colombia has committed to do a strong policy on increasing protection and increasing the targets of protection. So we estimate by the end of this year, Colombia will have in law 30% of its territory fully as protected areas. That's important. Second, we made bold decisions with Ecuador, Panama, and Costa Rica, and we created the largest maritime protected area in the Pacific. And that's something also that is kind of moving in the right direction and trying. And thirdly, we have a reforestation program that its intention is to reach a million trees, and frankly speaking, we're moving very fast onto that, and probably we'll get there. Still, controlling the territory, protecting our land is a challenge, and this needs to be addressed beyond the climate change policies, part of our security policy to make climate change initiatives effective. On the other side is the energy transition. Colombia has been historically a clean energy country. 74% of our matrix come from hydropower and natural gas. But in addition to that, in the past 3 years, we moved from 0.5% to 14% in non-conventional renewables, solar, wind. And we are one of the first countries in the world that created a legislation, and we're already doing 2 pilots to establish green hydrogen and blue hydrogen as part of our energy matrix and as a source of export. Now that we see this energy crisis, I think we're moving into technologies that are going to be game changers. So that's happening, and it's very important. I think that's going to be a major legacy from President Duque to Colombia, but to the world. I think that's important. Now, what the world can do more? I think that funding the transition to new technologies is the real challenge. First, because we're coming out of COVID, so every economy and every fiscal structure is really harmed right now. So we don't have the money, not Colombia, but the world, to move faster into the new technologies. That's about capital. So we'll need to find new financial structures, both in the markets and from government sources, to really accelerate the transition into these non-conventional renewables. If we don't do that, we will continue just showing up, all of us, to look well, but not really solving the problem, which is climate change and what is happening to our Earth.
That's great. So we're close to the end, but I do want to give a chance for questions from here. So questions from the audience? Anybody for the ambassador? This is your great moment, your chance. Anybody? Right over here, please. There's a mic just because I think people out in Zoom land won't hear you if you don't.
Thank you, Ambassador Pinzón, for coming here and speaking with us today. My question is tying into this last discussion of climate change and also the grand issue of the coca business. How is Colombia thinking of or engaging with as you say, the disenfranchised communities that do coca production for sustainable, for livelihoods, and engaging in that discussion or engaging them within this grander project of reforestation and positive climate sustainability within Colombia?
It's a big, big issue. First, of course, there are programs for reforestation that are offered, and typically those who get into those programs will get paid to do that, you know. But I have to be very transparent to you. What still continues to be is a competition for those communities. And I do care for those communities. They are not to blame. Somehow we are to blame, the state, for not providing all the strength to protect them. Because when we're not there, bad guys are there. And then you see the FARC or the ELN or the Clan del Golfo or whomever band you want to have, those are the ones who control those populations. Sometimes those communities really would say, well, we don't want coca, but what else we have? That's one thing. Or second, we don't want coca, maybe we have this, but then the guy that is running the place will say, you have to do coca. If you don't want to do coca, you know, you get a bullet or you leave. So that's displacement or assassination of social leaders that we've seen. So we, unfortunately, for the purpose of enhancing the policies that are related to social progress or to climate change, we need security. And probably I preach a lot of that because of my background and what I've been doing in my life. But one of the flaws and weaknesses that I see in Colombia was that by the year 2014-15, we got to the pinnacle of strength and we were really starting to move security into the right direction for everybody. And then we kind of reduce our efforts for hope of peace, but hope has not been resulting, and the political struggle. And yes, maybe the new government didn't have all the will, but maybe the previous one overpromised. All these became, you know, in a Gordian knot that we need to break apart and really regain the idea of security, not for the purpose of security, but for the purpose of development and social recovery.
Last question, right here.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador, for coming. Yeah, I just have a quick question in regards to the elections that are coming up. You mentioned we have this kind of, or the new security relationship or upgraded security relationship with the United States. How do you see that affecting the strategy, whether it's a Petro or a FICO? Kind of, do you see that the kind of security strategy of Colombia maintaining the same course, or how will that change given, you know, the political change? Especially in the context of this upgraded relationship with the U.S.?
I am fortunate because of the rules of the game. And the rules of the game is that we, public servants in Colombia, are not allowed to give opinions on politics. So I'm safe to answer that question. But what I will tell you, for you to analyze and think through, is that, of course, people and policy matters, and you have to be clear on what is the background of each and who their friends are. And that will tell you a lot of how the country might look to the future in one case or another. In my opinion, this has been a 200-year relationship between Colombia and the United States, and I think has been beneficial for both our countries. So I hope whomever comes to power understands this and make use of that as an opportunity to continue to evolve. In spite of their own ideological or political perspective, I believe it's very important to continue to raise the relationship with the United States and somehow strengthen opportunities. But it's what I think. You know, this is why you need to look on backgrounds and on friends that they might have in the world or even inside Colombia.
So on that note, our time has come to the end, but I want to thank you for an extraordinary conversation and your candor and your willingness to discuss these issues. It's, as you know, there's a a uniquely strong interest in the United States and events in Colombia for a variety of both historic and present reasons, and that's why it's so great to have somebody like you who's willing to come and spend time with us and to share your thoughts and your perspective over a long career in public service. And I want to finish just by thanking you for that. I mean, it's something that we care a lot about here. It's not easy to be in public service, and I can tell you, and I'm sure you could tell us, it's especially not easy to be in public service in Colombia. It's a very rough and tumble, contentious world, but we need good people, whatever their views and opinions on specific issues, who are willing to take that on. And so, for me personally, I just really appreciate your willingness to do this and to stand up there and to fight for the values that you believe in, and especially for the commitment to building a relationship with the United States, which has, for me and for so many others, been a very special thing. So thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here.